Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about how to take these giant, messy data sets and boil them down into simple, powerful business insights. So let's get right into the SQL tools that make that happen. So how do you do that? How do you take a million rows of, say, sales data and turn it into just one simple, meaningful number? Well, that's exactly what we're going to tackle. Let's dive in by starting with some of the most fundamental tools for summarizing data. All right, first up on our tour are these things called aggregate functions. These are basically the first tools in your kit, and they're all about condensing all that raw data into something you can actually understand, into meaningful analytics. So what are they? Well, you can think of them as super-powered calculators. I mean, they're the tools that let you get totals, averages, the highest or lowest values, and even just simple counts from your data. They work across thousands or even millions of rows all at once. And these right here, these are the 5 core functions you are going to use constantly. You've got min for the lowest value, max for the highest, sum for the total, AVG for the average, and count for just, the number of rows. These are your heavy hitters for understanding data at a high level. I love this analogy. Aggregate functions are like class reports. It's perfect, right? They're not looking at one student's test score. They're finding the lowest mark in the whole class, the highest mark, the class average, and how many students there are in total. It's all about summarizing the entire group. So if there's one thing to remember, it's this shortcut. Aggregates take many, many rows and turn them into one single answer. That's the crucial point. They take a whole column of data and spit back a single summary value. Okay, so a single answer is powerful, but it's not always enough, is it? Let's move on and see how we can build on this, because a lot of the time, we need more detail. Right. I mean, getting a total sales number is great, but what if your boss asks for sales per city? That big total doesn't help you there. To get those more detailed breakdowns, we're going to need to introduce a new clause. And that clause is called group by. What this does is it splits your data into different groups or subsets based on a column you choose. If you've ever used a pivot table in Excel, it's pretty much the same idea. This is how you get those sales by department or revenue by category reports that businesses absolutely live on. So a good way to remember this is split, then summarize. That's what group by does. It first splits the data into logical chunks, like all the rows for New York, all the rows for London, and so on. Then it runs those aggregate functions we just talked about on each of those individual chunks. Okay, now this is important. This slide right here clarifies what is probably the most common point of confusion for anyone learning SQL, the difference between where and having. They both filter data, but they do it in completely different ways. So, what's having? It's a clause that lets you apply a filter to your grouped results. In other words, you use it when your condition is based on the aggregate value itself. You can't use where to ask for departments with an average salary over $50,000 because where doesn't know about averages. But having does. It's built for that. So let's put it all together. This is the workflow. First, group by splits your rows into groups. Second, the aggregates, like sum or AVG, are calculated for each of those groups. And then finally, having steps in to filter out any groups that don't meet the criteria you set. This 3-step process is really the key to creating these powerful summarized reports. Okay, so we've built a query with all these parts. But now, let's pull back the curtain a little bit and look at how SQL actually thinks about all this. And here's the big surprise. SQL doesn't actually run your query in the order you write it. Not at all. It follows this hidden, logical sequence, and let me tell you, understanding the secret order is the key. It's what lets you debug your code and write really complex queries without pulling your hair out. Just look at this order. It starts with from, picking the tables, then it applies the where clause to filter out individual rows. Only after that does it do the group by. Then comes having to filter the groups, and way at the end, it sorts the final output with order by. You see? The filtering with where happens way before the final sorting. A great way to think about this is like making a pizza. So step 1, from. This is just picking your pizza base. You have to start somewhere, right? That's your table. Okay, you've got your base. Step 2 is where. This is like selecting your ingredients. You're filtering out any of the individual items you don't want on your pizza. We're getting rid of the bad stuff before we put it all together. All right, step 3, group by. Now that you have all your chosen ingredients, you start arranging them into logical sections. Half pepperoni, half veggie. You're creating organized groups on the pizza. And then step 4 is having. After you've arranged your toppings into groups, you can apply rules to the groups themselves. Maybe you decide you only want pizzas that have more than 3 toppings in total. Having lets you filter based on the whole group, not just one ingredient. And finally, step 5, order by. This is the last step. You've made all your pizzas, and now you're just deciding how to present them. You're serving them up in a sorted, logical way for the customer. So, that's the whole flow. But why does mastering this stuff matter so much? Why is it so important for your career? It's because of this number right here, 90%. Once you really truly get the hang of aggregates, group by, and having, you can answer up to 90% of all the standard business reporting questions that are out there. Think about that. You really do have the foundational tools now to turn raw data into actual decisions. So the only thing left to ask is, what are you going to discover first? What business question are you going to answer?